Hello. I've been wanting to talk about the New Way Forward Act for a while now. It's a bill that is currently passing through Congress, and it makes the Green New Deal look like chutes and ladders. It's basically chutes, meaning slides. Chutes and ladders. I don't remember. I haven't played the game since I was a little girl, but it's a board game. This particular bill makes the Green New Deal the $93 trillion bill that will destroy America, and then somehow they'll dump all that trash into the ocean, I suspect, and then rebuild it back up again in some way. Because we have to live in something. Well, this is so radical. You think no one would sign, anybody of good conscience would not sign on to the Green New Deal. You would also think somebody who is a moderate would not sign on to this New Way Forward Act. But unfortunately, what we call moderate Democrats are signing on to it. And that's the scary part. Now, we might have 4 more years worth of Trump. We might. If you don't go to the polls and vote for Trump because you think he's going to win, then you're going to be terribly upset the next day. But in 4 more years, most assuredly, it usually goes 8 years Dems, 8 years Repubs, 8 years Dems, 8 years Repubs. So almost most certainly, we will have a Democrat in 4 more years. And if we do, or next year, they may sign on, no matter how moderate they might be. And right now, we don't have a moderate. We have Bernie Sanders as the head, possible head of the Democrat ticket. And behind him is the squad, is occasional Cortex, AOC, who is behind this New Way Forward Act. Remember, Bernie Sanders is not harmless. Bernie Sanders is a naked communist. He's not pretending to be, as some people on YouTube have noted. He's not pretending. Just because he ran Burlington like a Democrat doesn't mean he would run the country that way. You cannot run a city, have one city in one state of the Union, very small city, run it, turn that whole thing into a communist city. You can't do that because it's people live outside of the city and businesses also exist outside of the city that do commerce and trade with the city. So you can't do that. A mayor doesn't have that kind of power. So I'm very surprised because this particular channel that I'm talking about, the man seems to be awfully well-read, intelligent, but I think he's probably not. Bernie Sanders has AOC and the squad behind. You can't be more radical or more racist or more anti-Semitic than the squad. And they're behind this, and they're behind Bernie. So if Bernie wins, this country will be extremist in every horrible sense of the word. Extremist. Not in a good way. This bill is about as long as our Constitution is, and essentially will remake America. So whereas a American citizen would go to jail for certain offenses and lose their right to vote, if you are illegal, this can be waived and you can be set on the path to citizenship. A judge, anti-American judge, which there are many, we found out that Trump can't do much of anything when he's just trying to protect everyone in this country, including the Hispanic people who come to this country. Even if you are fleeing your country because of violence, you would like to come to a country that doesn't have violence. So the violence is on the other side of the border, and you're protected inside this border. And that's one of the saddest things of all. Also, sex trafficking as well, and drugs. so many things. If you're trying to escape that, you certainly don't want it here. But this bill will release the obligation or destroy the law that says you must be deported if you commit certain crimes, even low-level crimes you can be deported for. You will stay here and become a citizen, and it's retroactive. It's like a grandfather clause. The scariest part of all is that if you have been deported, and we're talking about crimes like child rape, not just rape, child rape, murder, not just robbery or drugs. These are heinous crimes. You will become a citizen. You'll be able to stay in this country. And essentially, they really don't want any jail time at all whatsoever either. But if you have been deported and you've committed any of these crimes, like the Kate Steinle case, as if that wasn't a foreshadow of things to come, it really wasn't a foreshadow. It's what has been going on for a long time. They've been up on this news for a very long time now. That trial was no shocker to me because I've heard about this over and over again, except it just doesn't make the news. This time, because Trump was in office, it made the news. Well, if you've been deported because you've committed any of these heinous crimes, the American taxpayer, according to this bill, will have to pay for that felon that we deported, put them in first class and fly them back into this country. That is what is so insane about this. Now, speaking briefly on the Kate Steinle case, the man, it probably was a gang initiation. Usually a gang initiation involves you must go out and kill an American to be initiated into this particular gang. Don't know what the name of the gang is, but it could have been a gang initiation. He first said that he shot her when he was caught. It's the first thing he said. Then he said he was shooting at SEALs. But then his lawyer said to him, no, you can't say that either, because that's a $150,000 fine and you'll be in prison up to 5 years. You can't say that either. So they have a third story, and the third story was he found this gun under a bench wrapped up in cloth. Now, who goes around looking under benches? And if you saw something wrapped up under a bench, I wouldn't touch it, because God only knows what's inside of it. The story holds no water. So when he was unwrapping it, it fell to the ground, went off, and somehow shot Kate Steinle directly through the head. And as she was falling, she was with her father, she said, Daddy, please help me. When I heard that, I broke into tears. And my communist revolutionary boyfriend, who's behind Bernie and who's behind AOC and the squad, of course, because they're non-whites, but Bernie is white, got awfully upset because how could you possibly deport him and put him in jail for killing an American citizen? Only American citizens who shoot other American citizens are guilty of this crime. So he demanded that he be released. Well, he was released because they asked the jury, would you be able to render a verdict that was the antithesis of what our president, our current president, would want? And they took the people that said yes to that. A crime is a crime, because tomorrow they could kill, and they do, they mostly do, the criminals that do come over the border, and they live in areas where there are undocumented citizens and other citizens who are also Hispanic or African American, they live in these populations, and the crimes that they commit, for the most part, the greater percentage is against them. It's against them. Like that young woman in Philadelphia who was coming out of the mosque, and she was dressed in her hijab, and she was violently raped and murdered. It went off on the news, and immediately they said, this must be a Trump supporter that did this. It had to have been a Trump supporter. As it turns out, it was an illegal alien who brutally raped her and murdered her as she was coming out of the mosque. So they couldn't say anything, but they were ready to destroy the reputation, continue to destroy the reputation of Trump supporters. So if you care about these populations, these segments of our community, then you keep the criminals out of this country. You keep them out, put them in jail. They're not allowed to be citizens. They get deported after they serve their sentence. Now, I said to my friend, what does this New Way Forward Act sound like to you? Immediately, I made the connection. Instantly. This friend of mine is very intelligent, could make the connection. What does this sound like? Bringing criminals into this country. The fact that the Democrat Party, you can't reason with them and say, look, there's sex trafficking, there's children being sex trafficked, sex slavery is coming over the border, drugs that are killing people, gangs like MS-13, who they say doesn't exist, is coming and going across the border. Can we not at least filter out the criminals? Now, isn't this common sense? Why would the Democrats, just for votes, of course, they want it for votes because they want one-party rule. But what does this sound like? Immediately, it makes perfect sense why you would want criminals in particular. The Democrats used to try to convince us, no, these people just want to be free. They're not criminals. Some of them aren't. That's what Trump said. Some of them are rapists, some of them are bringing crime, some of them are bringing drugs, and he said, which everyone cuts out, and some, I'm sure, are very good people. A percentage may be criminals, and a percentage are very good people. So why don't we let the good people in and keep the bad people out? Just like if I was a refugee coming from a war-torn country, the different sects of Islam fight with each other. You hear this all the time. They're blowing up mosques of a different sect because they consider them hypocrites because they're not practicing the kind of Islam that they're practicing. Well, if I was Muslim and I came to this country, I would want to make sure that you're not letting in those people who are going to come here and blow up my mosque and kill my people. You're only going to let people in who are going to sects of Islam, other Muslims that respect other Muslims, not just non-Muslims. People who are not criminals that respect. You would think this is what the Democrats would want. But I clicked. Now there is little AOC recently. I have 2 mutts. Okay. AOC got herself a French bulldog. You would think that a socialist would go get the mutt. You know, the cheap one, the mutt, the unwanted one. No, she got the hybrid. I don't have a hybrid. And apparently nobody knew what they were going to name the dog. And so people were throwing out names. And I made up this name a long time ago about Kim Jong-un. I called him Minnie Mao. And I sent that into Holly Carr and they read it. And the producer said, that's my favorite. She named the dog Deco. Deco. So you see, the ones in charge are always the one with the money. They say that kings, and we must get rid of the kings and queens because they're decadent, but then they get into power, and it's a two-tier system. The ones at the bottom, and then the ones at the top, the very few. Usually it's just one person right at the top that has all the money and all the powers, and they claim they are for the people, but the people are nothing but cells in a state, and the state comes first. That's what communism is. It's non-personhood. That's what it's all about. So I said to them, new way forward. And I think they would have named, in fact, it's number one out of the, right here is a list of all the dictators of the world that have killed the most people. And he's quite beloved by communists everywhere, because they say, oh, he did so much good. Well, his name was Mao Zedong. Yes, and she should have named him Mini Mao. And he's responsible for about 78 million deaths. And recently it was found out that they didn't realize, but in 4 years' time, his Red Guard, young people, about 14 years old, kind of like MS-13 gangs, and then the brown shirts and the black shirts and the Red Army and Khmer Rouge. All of these fascism, you see, is socialism, okay? And before Stalin changed, just want to add this, the country changed over to straight communism. The name of that type of before you called it communism, USSR, United Soviet Socialist Republic, that's the real name. It was called the Soviet Democrats. Believe it or not, they use the word Democrats. And of course, Hitler patterned his Nazi rules after the Southern Democrats and the way they had the Jim Crow laws against former slaves and Italians. Believe it or not Mexicans. Mexicans were considered white under the law. They were not discriminated against. Racism. They were considered white, and they were allowed to immigrate here, as many as would come, as long as they weren't criminals. That was the only caveat. So, Mao Zedong, you're going to be shocked at what he called his little thing. Mao Zedong was a Chinese revolutionary, political theorist, and communist leader who led the People's Republic of China. Mao, while controversial, is still widely considered a savior of the nation. And the author here did a semester in China. After falling in love with its history, and what surprised in my conversations, that many people thought Mao had done 70 to 80% good. During his first 5 years, from 1949 to 53, he said to have systematically killed between 4 to 6 million people by sentencing them to die or by sending them to reform through labor camps. He organized mass repressions, established execution quotas, which means you have to kill so many people a day, whether you've done anything wrong or not. Even if you were a good little communist and pro-Mao, you just had to kill a certain amount of people a day. And defended his actions in these early years as necessary for securing power for the People's Republic of China. His social programs The Great Leap Forward. Great Leap Forward. And Cultural Revolution. What does that sound like? The resistance, the revolution. Everything is taken from Mao. Are two of the most ill-fated, poorly named initiatives ever. The first was an effort to rapidly industrialize China. He wanted the Chinese people to be the foremost producers of steel. So everyone in the country had to produce steel, but nobody had steel. So what they did was they ended up melting their pots and pans and giving it to the government. And as a result, 25 million people died because they starved to death. And then he had his Red Army. He convinced the young people to go out, crazed. You see, in communism, there is what our idea of good and bad is very different from theirs. It's either you are for the dictator or you are against the dictator. You are for communism or you are against. If you are against the dictator or against communism, that's immoral, that is wrong. You see, it isn't good and bad like we have grown up to understand the Judeo-Christian idea of good and bad, or even atheists know good and bad. We know what a kind act is and a bad act is, even if you are atheist. You are evil inherently because you are against the dictator. And the dictator, it's like a cult, is what it is. The dictator can mass murder right in front of your eyes. The dictator told his Red Army, the young people, who went out and harassed the middle class, bullied them, either killed them, beat them to death. The old people had to be beaten to death because they were the wisdom keepers. They are the ones that remembered the history of China. And the history of China before Mao had to be forgotten. There was no emperor, there was no poetry, there was no song, there was no artwork. Everything had to be destroyed before Mao. Mao, just like in North Korea, everything is the dear leader. All you know, all you learn is about the dear leader. When you turn on your computer or your television, everything is about the dear leader. That's your education. So they dug up tombs and graves and destroyed the bodies and destroyed the artwork, and poetry and song were destroyed. The beauty, this is the art of the people. This is the talent of thousands of, thank God they didn't destroy them all. Thank God there's still things buried, like the warriors of Xi'an. Thank God they didn't. But they did destroy so much. And this is the work of the people, the hands of the people, the minds of the people. But it's about the dictator, it's not about the people, it's about the state. It's not about the people, it's not about you. So people were bullied so much and so that they committed suicide, they couldn't take it anymore. And unfortunately, the number keeps getting higher. It could be 100 million that were killed. Now, the brown shirts, Hitler had brown shirts, Mussolini had black shirts, the Khmer Rouge were just like Mao's Red Armies, the young people that went out. And if you were against Pol Pot, you were against the dictator, you were for pro-Western culture. You were killed in the killing fields of Cambodia. I remember my communist revolutionary ex. When I talked to him about Pol Pot and that the Khmer Rouge had to go out and kill. And it went out and killed anyone with any Western ideas. And he said they had to. They had to get rid of them. because they were pro-America. They were thinking too Western. Now that's very scary. That's a Bernie supporter. And we have heard recently about some people working for Bernie who know what Fidel Castro did. If you were against Fidel Castro, if you were against the communist state, you were marched to the seashore and you were lined up and you were shot to death. And he said, that's what we're going to have to do. It's like Bill Ayers said. Bill Ayers said about 35 million people in America would have to be killed to change it over, because not everybody's going to change, even if you send them to one of these re-education camps. You're going to have to kill them. That's very interesting that he said that. And he said that in the 60s, so a lot more would have to be killed. And he's just the friend of Bill Ayers. No, he's a friend of Barack Obama, who they claim, because they compare his writings with Obama's 2 books, there's so many references to the ocean and sailing. And Bill Ayers does that. Obama doesn't, at that point in time, had no reference in anything. Actually hadn't written anything up to that point. Even when he was editor of the Harvard Law Review, he hadn't. So they don't think that he wrote those books at all whatsoever. It's possible Obama dictated some of his stories, some of his life stories, and Bill Ayers put it into a book. That's entirely possible that the whole thing is based on his words, but Obama didn't write it. And, well, anyway. So what happens at the end, like with the brown shirts and the camera, all these, you see, what you do is, in communism doesn't know how to build. It only knows how to destroy. It only knows how to destroy whatever exists. So you have these gangs, these crazed people who you give them license, people who are, say, adolescents, out of control, or violent people, the felons, people who are crazed and out of control and ready to commit violence. You put them in uniform and you tell them to go out and bully and harass, because we have to beat our population into submission. So they did that, and millions were killed. And to this day, they're still killing. Execution vans, they take your organ out and you're on your way to the hospital where the good communist is waiting for your fresh organ. And they boil dogs alive in pots. There's so many horrible things going on. The killing still continues in China. But what happens is after you've beaten your population into submission, and you have successfully instilled communism into your country, you have to get rid of those criminals. You have to get rid of the Red Army, the Red Guard. And Stalin had the Red Army. Mao had the Red Guard. Pol Pot had the Khmer Rouge. Mussolini had the black shirts, and Hitler had the brown shirts. Black shirts, I think, out of all of them, were the least crazed and violent. But I'm not saying they're any better. What happens is you have to bring order back, and you can't have chaos. You can't have these wild people who like to go out and kill and be violent, because you can't have them killing off the rest of your country. The country has to produce things. After all, you have to make the gold chairs for the dictator, don't you? And you don't want these people to wake up and realize that they've been used. Once they wake up and realize that they've been used by the dictator and the state, there's too many of them. They don't realize in numbers they could turn around and go after the dictator and the communist government and take it down. You see? So what you have to do is you have to get rid of these people. So we're going to be importing more and more. And we have MS-13 in our borders. They just come and go across the border, you know. That they want criminals in particular, not people who are fleeing from violence, or good, hardworking people, people who want a shot in life, People want to contribute to America, a system that works, for everyone. No, they want the criminals in particular. So the great leap forward, the new way forward. You had to name it something slightly different, AOC, didn't you? Or you are not smart enough probably to have written that. It's probably the mind of someone else, and I don't even think it's Bernie. It's someone else whose mind. So what happened was, see, there's the country. When you are sent off to the country in China, it isn't beautiful country living. It's hard labor. You're sent off to hard labor in cold, horrible conditions. A great deal of the Red Guard was sent out to the country after they did all their killing. And then most of them died under these harsh conditions, and Mao knew that they were going to die. And there was another segment of his beloved Red Guard. He went up to them with a tear in his eye, thanked them for what they did, and then watched them die by firing squad. So in the end, if we get our socialist leader who honeymooned in communist Russia in 1988, at the same time, we say, oh, but he's a Jew. At the same time, they were still marching Jews into the gulag to freeze and starve to death. He went there to honeymoon and sing, "This land is your land, this land is my land," naked, while his fellow Jews, is this anti-Semitic? Could you call him anti-Semitic? He claims that he's an atheist. Were being marched off to the gulag. People were anybody was being taken off the streets. Of course, they don't like the Jews. Anybody who practices, because it's an atheist. You take God away completely. So if these Jews want to practice their religion, you can't. You must get rid of them. You see, people were taken off the street, sent to the gulag. Their friends and family never saw them again. Talk to somebody from the former Soviet Union. See, the problem is that most people don't know about communism. All these young people just hear free education, free this and free that. They don't know what communism is. You're too young. And the schools are run by these hippies who embraced communism, socialism, and are selling it to the young people. You see, I was lucky in a way because my mother was of an immigrant family, was the change of life baby. And then when I was born, I was a change of life baby. So there's about 100 years there. So everyone I knew was old. I heard the stories from the elderly people. I would listen. And people who'd been through the Depression, who'd come over from Ellis Island, really suffered. People who knew communism, what the truth was before it was distorted in the schools and made a utopia. Thanks for joining me. Don't vote for Bernie. Trump, 2020. America, the United States. Interesting. Do you ever notice at the end, when Hillary's, the glass ceiling she was supposed to smash at the Javits Center, they were chanting Hillary, Hillary, Hillary. And then when Trump won, you know what they were, and say, oh, Trump's the ego. Trump's got the big ego. When Trump won, and he got on the podium and started to speak, the people there in the MAGA hats were saying, USA, USA, because it's about America. America means us. The flag represents us. You don't pledge allegiance to a state. You pledge allegiance to protect your neighbor, to be there for your neighbor, your fellow American. That's what Pledge Allegiance is for. It was about us. Never at any Trump rally, even the rally in India today, where 125,000 people came out to greet Trump, they always chant, USA, USA. Because that means us. It means us. Talk about for the people. At Bernie's, it's Bernie, Bernie, Bernie. It's about him. It's about them. It's about the dictator. Wake up. Thank you for joining me.